for all Nevada. And we're just gonna do like a quick 20-25 minute drawing. But this is something that you can sort of apply to everything. Let me just switch it over so you can see the drawing. Yeah, let me move this up a little bit. So yeah, as you can see, what we're gonna be working on today is just basically a tree. But if we apply the principles of mindfulness to how we draw this tree, it can help to sort of calm you, center you. And because you're drawing from your imagination, there's no pressure to make anything perfect. The idea is just to sort of focus in on what you're making, which can help you if you're feeling anxious or overwhelmed, just to do this one activity and place yourself in the present moment. So let's go ahead and get started. I can leave this here. Oh, what happened in the video? Can everyone see?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and get started. First, all you need to do really is get a pencil and a piece of paper like I have here. It doesn't have to be fancy drawing paper. It doesn't have to be a fancy drawing pencil. It's just whatever you have on hand. But just go ahead and start with the trunk of your tree. Just try and create a gentle line. You don't need to try and have a straight line. I'm going to switch over to a darker pencil so you can see. But you don't have to have a really straight line, because trees, like most living things, have really organic, sort of soft shapes. So as you create the shape of this tree, try and keep that in mind. If you had a favorite tree, say if you had a front or backyard growing up, or there was somewhere at school that you liked hanging out, or somewhere, on your work campus, wherever that might be, you can imagine that tree, but try to keep from pressuring yourself to copy a specific image, since that's not really what we're going for here. All you're really going for is just like the idea of a tree. So once you have your trunk established, just a basic 2 lines, go ahead and spread that upward. And what you're going to do is try and, again, create really uneven sets of 2 lines to show where the branches part. And generally these branches, they'll split naturally into 2s and 3s. So you can use these little V shapes to start separating out your different branches. I'm going to go ahead and make sort of a big one up here that could maybe support a tire swing or something. Try and keep it playful. And as you're drawing, as you're moving your pencil, really focus in on exactly where your pencil is on the paper. So keep your eyes on it. You don't need to be looking somewhere else or thinking ahead at all. Try and be as present as possible as you move along. So once you have that established, you can start thinking, okay, well, do I want to sort of indicate that there's anything behind the tree? I'm going to go ahead and just sort of similarly to how I did here, have just 1 branch in the back, but you can move your tree however you want it to look, really. So once you have that sort of set in motion, you can leave that be. We're done with the trunk for now. We'll come back around to it. The next step is to just sort of create these very soft, almost cloud-like rounded shapes. As you can see, they're not very detailed at all. One of the keys, I think, to drawing in general, but especially when you're drawing mindfully, is not to get ahead of yourself. So right now we're remaining in this step. You don't need to worry about where details will go or what they'll be. This is something you can work out as you go through the process of drawing this. Be patient with yourself. Allow yourself to sort of take your time here, because we have time. Oh. How's everyone's trees going? This is also, you don't have to be drawing along. If you want to try and do this later, you can. This is something you can sort of do over and over. I know whenever I'm feeling sort of like I don't know what to do, or I don't know where to get started, I'll find myself drawing these sorts of things, trees and other sort of natural objects, just because it's something you can sort of do over and over and get a different result every time. And it's a very calming thing to do, to sort of focus in on just the idea of drawing rather than the need to make something really perfect. So once you have your tree sort of shaped out, you have this general idea of where these central areas will go. If you want, you can add in a few more sort of sticking out bits, just because, again, even though natural things, they do have symmetry within them, often they are asymmetrical. Doing this will help to create a sense of not necessarily reality, but just sort of naturalness to our tree. Okay, now, once we have this step completed, if you want, go ahead, just indicate sort of the ground in a really vague way, and then decide where your light's going to be coming from. Now, in this drawing, just for fun, I decided that this tree was going to be backlit. You can kind of see the sun in the background there. So most of the front of the tree is really dark, and then you have these highlights on the edges. But I'm thinking I'll do something different with this tree. So you can have your light coming directly from the top, from the side, from in front or behind, whatever you decide. But that's going to sort of guide us as we add in more detail on this drawing. And I like to start with the trunk just because it's a much simpler shape. These rounded shapes, we're going to be putting more detail into this part than this part really, because this is just sort of straight down. So let's just go ahead. I'm going to say that my light source is coming sort of from the top and in front of the tree. So this one will be a lot more bright than the example one I drew. But also because it's from above, a lot of the trunk will be in the shadow of these leaves. So I'm going to go ahead and say that maybe there is where the shadow will stop. And then as you're shading, you just use these very short, quick lines. They don't need to be very dark, because what we're going to be doing is layering sort of the same amount of pressure, the same shade over itself, almost as if we're painting with a pencil, to create this blended effect that you see here. If anyone has any questions, feel free to message in the chat. But as you can see, this is already giving, sort of distinguishing the trunk of the tree from the leaves just a little bit. And since this back limb is further away, I'm just going to go ahead and real quick make that extra dark, because it's also further away from our light source. And you're going to want, as you go through shading, to keep all of your lines sort of going in the same direction. You can even pick up the pencil a little bit instead of keeping it on the paper as you go. That can help you to maintain sort of a smoother effect. It won't necessarily look perfectly smooth, but perfection is by no means what we're going for here. I also generally like to keep the trunk of the tree a little darker than the rest of the tree, just because I feel like generally that's how trees look. You have sort of a dark bark trunk and then these lighter leaves. Now we can go back over that and add more detail in a bit. But for now, let's move on to the leaves of the tree. So this is kind of the fun part, because what we're going to do is work down from where the light would be, which in my case is near the top of the tree, near the sort of rounded top bits of these shapes. So first, I'm just going to fill in almost, not all, but almost all of these tree leaf shapes with a very, very light hatching. So you can see this is already lighter than what we have down there, because this is our base. This is, unless it's just paper color, this is as light as it's going to be. So you want to make sure that this looks like it's the brighter part of the tree. And you can see here, now that I'm doing these slightly larger strokes, I'm moving a little bit with my arm instead of my wrist, which will help you to maintain that sort of straight line and a little bit more control as you draw. Like I said, you don't need anything fancy. If you don't have a pencil on you, you can always use a pen. I've definitely done that before and it's turned out just as good. You can use printer paper. You can even use the back of, I don't know, a napkin or a receipt, whatever you have on you. And as you do this shading, this sort of wide-ranging shading, notice how the pencil or pen feels in your hand. Notice the sound it makes as you sort of rhythmically move your hand across the paper to get these even little lines. Doing so will help ground you a little bit more and maybe even imagine yourself in this scene, in this setting. I know that right now this looks cartoonish, but as we fill it in a little bit more and add more lighting detail, that's really what's going to bring this to life. Which, especially when maybe you're not getting outside as much right now, this is a good time to find other ways to connect with nature and really to also be sort of find ways to enjoy being present where you are, if that makes sense. Okay, so we're almost done filling in this tree, which means now we can start going back and adding more detail. So pick a place, say this, where you can go back over and start adding more shadow. And as you can see, just adding it over what's already existing there creates this sort of blended effect, like I mentioned earlier, and also helps to define it. So as you move downward, further away from your light source, you don't even need to add more pressure because you're layering on top of what's already there. If you want to go through and define these lines again, to sort of further give the idea that there is a shape there and that these things are in front of each other, feel free, but you don't have to. If you want, you can also play with different directions of hatching now. That can give the illusion of motion. If you want to look like the tree is blowing in the wind, or if your tree is wider than mine and you want to emphasize that it is wide, the horizontal lines might help you create that effect. As you go through now that you have sort of layers of shading, you can also add more detail. I have no line here, but I'm still going to create sort of an extra shading effect here, just to give the idea that the tree is more detailed than just those lines, just these shapes. And you can do so elsewhere too. And then if you're If your branches are now sort of the same color as the leaves around them and you want them to stand out more, you can go back over and just darken them again. And that too will create the sense that, oh, this light is coming from somewhere and this tree is casting a shadow on itself. As you move from side to side, again, listen to the sound that your pencil makes. I find that this can be kind of a comforting sound for a lot of people because it's another way to sort of bring yourself into the present moment, draw attention to where you are. That can keep your mind off of whatever may be causing you worries or just distracting you. Whatever way you can find yourself to anchor yourself where you are can help you to sort of realign your mind, if that makes sense. As you can see, the tree is now coming together. It looks a little bit more like a real tree. As you add more details, as you move closer to your light source, you can again use lighter lines, not as much pressure, just to show that the shadows nearer the sun or what have you aren't quite as deep. And then as you move further away, again, you can use a little bit more pressure or the same amount of pressure and just use that layering technique that I talked about earlier, which will give you plenty of dimension. As you add more and more details, try and really place yourself in this scene. Imagine what things smell like. Is this tree in a park? Is it in a backyard or a garden or even in a forest? Depending on that can change how you feel when you look at this and how you imagine yourself in this space. All right, now that we have a lot more detail in sort of the top of the tree, let's go back over and maybe just add some texture in this trunk, because you're going to get kind of a different texture, sort of longer lines, less roundedness in the trunk of a tree, in the bark, than in the rest of it. You can also go through and sort of shade the bottoms of things or the further away limbs if you want to emphasize their place relative to you, the viewer. And then maybe, as you're getting close to being done with your tree, you can work here at the bottom and say, okay, so if the light is coming down this way, what shape would the shadow be? And I'm going to go ahead and say, since it's sort of to the front, my shadow is going to be a little bit behind the tree. So I'm just going to use more of those vertical lines to sort of create this flattened out, rounded shape near the base of the tree. And doing that sort of gives the whole scene a little bit of weight. Now it feels more like the tree is close to the ground. And it is important to note, if you're going for realism here, that the closer a shadow is to the thing that's casting the shadow, the darker it will be. So you can go back through and layer over a little bit, so with some hatching, with some lines to create that effect. I'm just going to go back through and add some extra little details so that the leaves of this tree feel really textured. As you can see, it's possible to create a drawing that feels real-ish without drawing every single leaf or drawing every single detail. It's not necessary to worry about those kind of things. And I think that's an important lesson that you can sort of take away from drawing and art and really apply it everywhere. Is sometimes it's enough just to focus on the shape of things and how they're existing in the world, and that will be enough for you to connect with people or to connect with yourself. And you don't need to worry about every single little piece of your life all at the same time. You can go from place to place. You don't need to be everywhere at once. Okay, I hope my hand isn't covering this up too much, but you can see we here have a really nice tree, and I'm sure if you've been following along, that you have a beautiful tree too. I hope that, as we close up, I hope that doing this has helped you to ground you a little bit in the here and now. Really focusing in on physical sensations, whether it's through yoga or through art or really anything, can be a really, really helpful way to check in with yourself and help you move through your days. Now, because I use this pencil, as you can see, my hand is a little dirty with extra pencils. So I'm just going to go around the edges and clean up around the edge of this tree so we can see it really clearly. Art is therapy for me too. I think it's a really therapeutic act. And I also think it's really important not to put so much pressure on yourself to make something perfect, because perfection isn't really, it's not a very fun goal and it's not a very helpful goal. As long as you're making something that you enjoy the process of making, I think that makes anything worthwhile, really. All right, I think that's about all the time I have. Thank you so much to anyone who sort of hung out and drew with us. And stay tuned.